the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 8. And this is your host, Chris Blanchard. My guest today is Steve Pincus from Tipi Produce in Evansville, Wisconsin, where Steve farms with his wife, Beth Kazmar. Tipi Produce grows about 45 acres of certified organic produce and markets to 500 CSA members, makes nearly year-round sales to stores in Madison and Milwaukee. In fact, the last carrots from last fall's harvest are going to be delivered the same week this episode goes live. Steve has incredible employee retention from year to year, with many, many employees having worked on the farm for nearly 20 years. We talk about taking the long view with employee management, cropping systems, and business investments, as well as harvesting and storing lots and lots of carrots. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Vermont Compost, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality composts and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is also sponsored by Audible. Discover the world of audiobooks and absorb yourself in the latest business management texts, farming essays, or just a dramatic retelling of the Star Wars saga. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/farmer-to-farmer. Welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast, everybody. I am so pleased to introduce my guest today, Steve Pincus from Tipi Produce in Evansville, Wisconsin, just south of Madison. I've known Steve since 1993 when he was farming on the outskirts of Madison, and I've always enjoyed his company, his approach to farming and management, and the great vegetables that result. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about Tipi Produce to get us started and how you got to where you are today?
Well, sure. It's taken a while. Our farm is we currently produce about 45 acres of certified organic veggies, most of that vegetables, a little bit of strawberries and rhubarb and raspberries. But I started farming in the late 70s, 76, 77, on some borrowed land out in the driftless area of Wisconsin. And I had no farm background at all. I was really coming from not knowing anything. My biggest challenge actually was how to live in the country, because I grew up in the city in a row house in Philadelphia. So over the years, we've been able to gradually grow the farm, going along with an increase in interest in organics here. We've been located near and marketing to a great hotspot in Madison, Wisconsin, one of the real centers for alternative and organic agriculture. So we've helped build it. We've been part of the community. We've done a lot of education of ourselves and helped other people along the way. Done a lot of consumer education. And we are now currently running a farm that sells in Madison, Milwaukee, Janesville, not too far away, so about 100-mile distance from the farm. About half of our income comes from CSA, pack about 500 boxes a week, and the other half comes from practically year-round sales to stores like Willie Street Food Co-op and Outpost Natural Food Co-op in Madison and Milwaukee, and a One Whole Foods store. We're just now, as we talk, at the very end of March, finishing up washing and packing and selling the very last carrots and celeriac from the 2014 crop. The final deliveries will be made this coming week.
And then lettuce will start up again at the end of May.
Yeah, the first lettuce is looking fabulous in the greenhouse, ready to transplant. There may be some overlap this week between the carrots the last carrots being delivered and the first lettuce going into the field.
Now I know that and not to get right down in the weeds right away, but I think one of the first questions a lot of people ask is, how are you still having carrots to sell in March?
Well, we don't have a real sophisticated system, but we simply keep them cold and humid enough. We store them in large bins that hold about 750 pounds of carrots. They go in there right at harvest time, and they get put into coolers. We actually have 6 coolers around the farm that we use for during the winter. We use only 3 of those in the summer. And we've just kept them in good shape by keeping them close to freezing and not letting them dry out. These are above ground coolers. They're not sophisticated, but we cover the wooden bins with plastic bags to keep them in pretty good condition. And
those big plastic bags that they're like the size of a pallet.
Yes,
right?
Yes,
yeah.
Just a large plastic cover. I mean, some farmers actually line the insides of the wooden boxes with bags and then tie them up at the top to completely enclose them. We don't do that. We allow a little more ventilation than that.
Okay. And when you talk about selling year round, you're selling. This is all crops that you harvested in the fall. You're not growing things in the greenhouse over the winter.
No, actually, as a older line farmer, we are one of the few farms around here that doesn't use a hoop house. All our growing is done outside. The only use for our greenhouses is growing our transplants. But we extend our season in the fall by using these storage crops, well into the winter and into the early spring the next year. And we're about to have a gap of about a month where we don't sell anything before the asparagus gets going.
Okay. But that must be awfully helpful for keeping employees on.
It really makes a difference. It's one reason our farm's been able to grow, that we've been able to keep our best people working part-time in the winter, and we've been able to keep our produce in front of our customers and on the store shelves, and everybody appreciates it. Our wholesale customers are going big. They're pushing the local issue. We buy from farmers in your neighborhood, and we can allow them to keep that going all winter.
That's really great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you talk about keeping people on part-time through the winter. I think this is something that you're kind of known for regionally, Steve, is your skill or your I might even say the wisdom of your approach when it comes to managing employees. And I know, I mean, we've talked about this a lot in the past in other circumstances, but you're a big believer, I think, in having plenty of people on the farm, not working people too many hours a week, and really trying to build that crew cohesion on your farm. Yeah,
right from the very beginning, we've never brought anyone on the farm with and called them an intern or an apprentice. We've had employees right from the start, and we've tried to pay them enough so that they're fairly compensated, and if they're working full time, so that they can live on it. Partially that was because I never really had a place on the farm for people to stay. And I started off at such a low level of knowledge that it just didn't seem fair to imagine that I could teach anybody anything. I guess folks are learning now. A lot of people have gone on from this farm to run their own places. But I still like to keep somewhat of a separation between by having people come as employees. I mean, it seems fair to pay them for their time in that way. That's what works out for us. And as I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, I came up with this comparison. Every year on our farm, we pay our employees our total payroll with the additional overhead that we pay for the government programs and unemployment and so on. Equals just about what it costs to buy all the farm equipment that we own. In other words, if I went out to buy the equivalent farm tools, tractors, rotovators, cultivators, delivery trucks, irrigation equipment, I would spend just what it costs me to pay 1 year's crew wages.
Wow.
And that's how important that is to us financially. I mean, it's very nice to have a fabulous $30,000 or $40,000 tractor in great shape, but we have several employees who are making $30,000 to $40,000 a year here on the farm each year. So keeping things moving well, having the right people on the farm really pays off. It's the most important part of the economics and also the fun of the farm.
Well, yeah, and that's something that's always interested me. It seems like you enjoy having people around, and when I've talked to people that work on your farm, it seems like people really enjoy being there, and that's not something that. I know from a lot of farms that I work with, and I certainly experienced this on my place, people were happy in May and it was all kumbaya. And by August, everybody wanted to kill each other. And that doesn't seem to be a TP Produce way of doing things.
Well, I'm really glad it isn't. But I don't know if I can pinpoint just why. Maybe I've just learned over the years to keep my hat on my head and not throw it at people, metaphorically. One thing I tell myself and I tell my employees too is that, look, guys, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. When you make a mistake, well, it might be $100 mistake, and I'm going to make plenty of mistakes, but those are $1,000 mistakes. So I'm not going to get upset at this. You need to be able to make decisions on your own at the appropriate levels and not worry about whether it's 100% right. Farming isn't 100% business. We're not going to get it like a manufacturing plant. I kind of figure that if we get it 90% right, we're going to have a great year. I don't think I've ever had a year when everything, when I can't look back and say, that crop didn't do well. We have 45 different crops here, and every year something or two or three is not going to be up to par. And I just can't expect my employees and me either to be running at 100 or 100+% every day. It's not the way people work. It's not the way the weather and the biology of the farm allows.
You really do have to be able to I'd almost say, get over it quickly when things go wrong. Even if you get stuck and dwell on it, there's not a lot of time for that on the farm either. If you have a stumble, if something does go wrong, if you spend hours or days wrapped up in that and being less than as productive as you could be, farming's all about time, and that has a really bad, I wanted to say something eloquent, but it has a really bad effect on the farm. It has and I think it's kind of a tumble down thing when you let those emotions and reactions get out of control.
Yeah, well, that is part of it. That's part of just being a good manager, is just maintaining a steady mood. My wife and I may not be so steady, but when we have issues or things that I want to vent, we can do that together. There's a difference sometimes between what I'm actually feeling and what I actually am putting out to my employees. My job is it's like the coach on the team. The team maybe have fallen behind, but the mood is, come on, guys, we can do this. Let's just be steady. Let's play our game. We know what we're doing. Let's get back into it.
Now, this is a little bit of a hard question, I think, for somebody who's has that skill and is able to do that. But I just did a couple of lectures out in Vermont about employee management, and this was a question that came up in two different groups on 2 different days. Is at a very practical level, how do you keep your hat on when you feel like throwing it?
Part of that's just experience. Because that hat came off a lot more 10 and 15 years ago than it does now. And part of it is having the farm at the point where I'm not really worried about those $100 mistakes. Again, if I go back 15 years, or maybe when we had just moved to this farm and things were tighter, I'd be more concerned about it. But I think it's part of something you just have to grow into, because when you're running a business and it's where the money issues are paramount, then maybe you do have to worry about that a little more. But you still can't expect your employees to live up to some incredible standard of perfection. Most of them are young, they're inexperienced, and management, the quality of employee, it flows directly from the quality of management, of what you're telling your employees, of the level at which you're instructing them, and how clear you make your expectations. And if you're on a smaller farm, when we were smaller, I used to work side by side with my people much more often. So we had a chance to learn together, and I had a chance to show them things that I've already learned. Now I'm a little more distant. We have 20 people a day working on this farm for much of the season, and I have to manage in a somewhat secondhand at this point. But
do you have mid-level management on your farm then?
We do. We have a very informal structure, but it's clear we have 3 or right now 4 people who are our managers. And those people have been working on the farm for 18 and I think 14 or 15 years, and Carrie's been here 9 or 10, and John has only been a couple years. So they really understand, and not only do they understand, but they helped create this farm. Their personalities are embedded in this farm. So, we get along. The reason they've stayed is because we see things similarly. And I've been able to pay them, a good amount of money. They've totally earned it. And even these managers are only working 4 days a week.
Whoa! What?
Well, one of our keys to keeping people here year after year is that we don't burn them out. And we find that often by the second or third year, if someone keeps coming back, they only want to work 4 days a week, or maybe they want to take a day off every other week because they have personal things to do. Last couple of years, we've had some really fabulous people, but they've been involved in a small CSA operation with other people, a cooperative group, and they've needed time to work on that. So they've been working here 4 days a week. And even these older employees do it 4 days, and that's why they can stick around, because that balance works for them. They're paid.
And those are 4 pretty short days, right? Those aren't farmer days.
No, they're essentially 8-hour days. We try and keep it to 8 hours of actual work time, so that when people leave, they still have energy, and they hit August and they're not worn out yet. And maybe we hit October and we're still not worn out.
Wow.
It works pretty well. Now, those aren't my hours, of course, but
you're the farmer, right?
Yeah, I am the farmer. So, the buck stops here and I take a load. But over the last couple of years, I've been hiring people to take more of my load. I've been hiring more skilled farm hands, specifically with the idea of taking some of my work. And that allows me simply to work less, or to give up some of the more physically demanding jobs as I get older. I'm in my 60s. And it allows me to do more management, too. Actual making decisions, researching, walking the farm more, figuring things out, and making better decisions, because I don't have to do all the repair work. I don't have to do all the watering on the weekends in the greenhouses and simple jobs like that other people can do even better than I can do.
I'm curious, Steve, as you've had more time to spend doing that walking around the farm piece, that actual real intentional management job, are you finding that the farm is doing better?
Yeah, the farm definitely is better. Part of our image as we hire these more skilled people, and we're paying them much better right from the start, they're not coming in at rookie wages either, is that the farm will actually pay most of what it costs us to have them here, by putting more skills into the farm at the tractor level and the management level. We're able to stay ahead of problems. We don't have so many rescue jobs on weeds, particularly. We're able to do a little more spraying where needed to deal with diseases proactively. And then in some years, not always, but it seems to more than pay for itself. If I'm paying somebody $30,000 a year to be here on that somewhat higher level, they may earn me back $20,000 of that, just
right.
in profits from improved production. So that makes them look pretty cheap.
That makes them look like a good investment.
Yeah,
that's
good deal.
That's called ROI right there.
Yeah.
You know, and now you mentioned 20 people on the farm. In addition to yourself and Beth, so that puts you at about 2 acres per person, which I think is which is kind of actually a pretty standard number. You must be getting a lot out of your employees during the time that they're there.
Well, we try to. We figure we're hiring about 450 hours per actual production acre, and that includes drivers, delivery, and all the employee time. And that's that's fairly substantial, but of course we're getting back $20,000 roughly per acre. At some at CSA prices, some at wholesale or direct wholesale prices. And I feel like we can get a lot out of our employees because they've been well organized, and especially the last few years, we've had a really stable crew for a while. And then last year was particularly great because we only brought in maybe, I think, 3 new people out of that 20. So everybody really knew what they were doing. And it gave me a chance to step back and do some of that larger managing. Now, this year is a little different. We're going to have a lot more new folks. Many of our 3, 4, 5-year vets have moved on to other exciting farming projects around the country. But I think we have enough experience here to bring these new people up to speed fairly quickly.
And I think when you get into having that kind of retention rate on your employees, suddenly you're not having to deal with these questions of training, of having to dismiss people who aren't working out. I mean, you've got people who've already. You already know what you're getting into every year, and so does everybody who's coming back on the farm.
Yes, they do. I mean, we can sit down at the end of the year. Well, maybe when we have our crew party in early December, talk about what's coming up. What are our goals in general for the coming year, and folks already know the basics. Even 1 year under their belt makes a huge difference. Anybody who comes back for a second year is worth quite a bit more than they were the first.
Yeah. Now, my memory is too that you do other things to make things easier for your employees. I mean, right? You guys run a bus to Madison?
Well, we own a minivan, a Honda van, and we so 7 people a day come from Madison to the farm, which is about 35-minute drive. For free. We cover that expense because many of our best people over the years don't have cars, and they don't want to own cars, or they don't have a car that they can trust, maybe. So that that phase of life.
I know that story.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I've been there as a farm worker.
Yeah. So we can take care of that for them, and we also subsidize carpooling. That those 7 people from Madison isn't enough, but there's at least 1 other car a day coming. We always make sure we hire enough people with cars. But if we have enough, then no one has to drive more than 1 or possibly 2 days a week, and we subsidize those carpools. We pay for most of the expense of getting out here. So that helps a lot. It's part of our overhead that seems to really pay off in widening the pool of people that we can hire.
I just think it's really interesting to think about taking that kind of a focus on essentially employee happiness, employee satisfaction, as really an investment strategy. I think so often we are stuck in that mode of I want to hire somebody and maybe I'm going to do an internship because I'm going to hire an intern because that allows me to save some money.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like saving money on employees is your shtick at all.
No, not really. We've always tried to pay kind of at the upper end of the local scale, where when I could, and I think we could right from the start, but I've been focused on the business and focused on the satisfaction of employees and customers and putting something together that was going to last. And I think at this point, we're pretty stable, and generally we're making enough money, so that is not the big issue for us. It's we want to pass on the success of the business to the people who are helping. Folks who are here for 1 year, they're getting paid, pretty modestly, especially compared to some jobs in Madison, which is
right.
Not a low pay city. But again, when they come back for that second year, they get a pretty substantial raise because it really reflects how much more valuable they are when they return.
I think I might characterize this as taking a long view, with even making a decision with how much we're going to pay a first-year employee and how we're going to structure that employee's work. That really what you're doing is you're not just looking at how am I getting the carrots weeded, but how am I going to get the carrots weeded next year, and also, be able to offload watering in the greenhouse on the weekends to somebody else. And that kind of comes back to how you treat that first year employee. And that seems like something that you've done in a lot of areas of the farm, Steve. I saw on your website, you guys have just installed a photovoltaic system, which is, of course, kind of a long view sort of an enterprise.
Yes, it is.
What prompted you to do that?
Well, it was mostly that long view. It was that feeling that we have been fortunate enough to benefit from the growth of organics, that our customers have been great, and we had some money in the bank. And at the moment, money in the bank is not doing anything. It's not working in any way for us. And we felt that this would be a way to really live out the ideals and the values that we have, and I think our customers and employees have too. And this is part of why they're supporting us for the long haul. They're not just looking at 1 year's vegetables. They're looking at the health of the land, the health of the farmers and crew, and being involved with a system that supports that longer outlook.
And I think now your system's tied into the utility company still. You're not doing all of the power for the farm this way with those 6 coolers running.
No, that wouldn't be practical at all. No, it's a very typical system that is hooked into the main grid at this time of year, probably today, on a very sunny day where we're not using much electricity. The coolers are, we're down to 1 cooler with those carrots in there. We're pumping a fair amount of electricity back out into the grid. But when we start things up in the summer, even though we're producing a little more power during those long summer days, we're going to be buying still quite a bit. Over the year, it looks like this system will produce about half the electricity that we use on the farm.
That's great.
I think it's pretty great. It's been running now for just about a month, and it's been an unusually sunny, brilliant, and cold month, which are ideal conditions for making power. So it's really gotten off to a great start. We've, of course, there are some tax credits and advantages that will help pay for this. We may receive some grants, but we're not sure. We went ahead and paid for it and set it up anyway. And if the grants don't come, then the payback period will be longer. But with the grants, even if we get half of what we'd hoped for, it looks real good. It looks like our break-even point is somewhere out about 12 years out. And then all the electricity from then on is essentially free, that we will, pay it up or just kind of paying ahead on this.
Well, and that idea of paying ahead, I remember when I talked to you during we had that big drought it was 2012, I think here.
Yep.
That kind of, it was brutal all over the Midwest, and I was farming that year still, and I remember talking to a lot of farmers that year, and you could hear how drawn out they were.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot left in August of that year. And I remember remember a conversation that you and I had, and you made the comment you were tired, but you weren't worn out. You were tired, but you knew you were going to make it to the end of the year. And I had a lot of farmers that I was talking to who were just, it wasn't clear that they were going to make it through in any kind of a sustainable way. And one of the things we talked about there was kind of that priority of investment and looking for things that are gonna pay back. And it seems like that's something you've done all along with your infrastructure and with your equipment. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, building the farm gradually, of course, we really had to be practical. I mean, we've tried to put in every year about 6 to 8% of our total gross sales reinvested back into the farm. I mean, sometimes that's the structure, like a new greenhouse, or maybe it's a new roof on our large barn that we use pretty fully, and sometimes it's in a tractor or piece of field equipment and or a delivery truck. But making that investment's been really important in building things up, and getting to the point where we can handle the ups and downs, because it gives us an infrastructure that's pretty resilient. I mean, okay, resilience. Number one, it's got to be the soil. I mean, your soil has to be quite good. I think if we had had that drought the first or second year we were on this farm, we would have had a lot more trouble because the soil just wouldn't have been in shape. We moved here in 2002. That was our first year on this farm. And luckily we'd had 10 years under our belt to improve the soil. So that held up. Right. And one of the first investments we made in the farm was for an irrigation well. We're on sandy loam soils, and we'd never farmed these sorts of soils before. But it became pretty clear just with this 1-year transition period we had before we started growing produce, how different these soils were, how much lighter textured, and how much more water they were going to need. So that irrigation, full-scale 200 gallons a minute irrigation system was absolutely essential. And by the time that heavy drought came, we had the equipment, we had it set up so that given a pretty much 24-hour-a-day effort to keep things going, we were able to pull it off and give our crops enough water. It was turned out to be actually a very profitable year, but it was exhausting by the time we hit the end. Chris, yes. I was so tired in December.
But I do remember talking to the folks that had the irrigation, who had the infrastructure when that weather hit, actually found I think a lot of people learned why we do vegetable production in California in this country.
Yeah.
Because it's when if you've got the irrigation water, it actually gets a lot easier.
Yes.
Than in a dry year.
Yes. The plants stayed healthy. The quality for most things was terrific. Well, not cool season crops so much, but our summer crops did phenomenally well. And it was, up to that point, our most profitable year ever. We worked for it, and my crew really sweated. I mean, it was not, I don't look back on it as a fun year, but it worked out, and people ate well. Our CSA boxes were full, and the store shelves had our produce on there.
Now, you mentioned having that 1 year of transition between, so you had a farm out in Fitchburg, right?
Yep.
Just out which is maybe 5 miles from downtown Madison?
That's about right. Yeah.
Okay. And then you bought this new piece of ground. Why did you decide to move?
Well, that farm near Madison was rented. And although it was a really nice, fertile, productive piece of ground that had been farmed as a U-pick farm, so it had some equipment, it had an irrigation system, even better than what we have here, actually. The owners wanted to sell it, and they were looking at $40,000 an acre. We weren't going to buy that. And besides, we were outgrowing it. That farm was about 20 acres, and we were bursting at the seams at that point. We had put in very little infrastructure, not many renters would actually build buildings on somebody else's farm. We weren't about to do that, so we didn't have enough indoor space. We didn't have cooler space. We were lacking a lot there, and we had a good future. We had a business that was really growing and thriving at that point. So when we found this farm, we were able to stay growing on that rented land for 1 year while we cover cropped at least part of this farm. We owned this farm for a year, and we had improvements to make too. Our current farm was Amish owned, and it needed electricity. It needed a fair.
Oh, wow!
it needed some improvements. We weren't ready to move in the day they moved out. We couldn't have done that. So it did give us somewhat of a jump, and it really helped us to kind of learn what we had here. At least they had 1 more year of figuring out, of doing some disking and working the fields and planting with some equipment that we had brought over to this farm.
Steve, I'm going to break here for a word from our sponsors. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is sponsored by Vermont Compost. Vermont Compost potting soils are a really special product. I used Vermont Compost Fort V as a blocking mix and potting soil for over 12 years on my farm, and we grew some really great transplants with it. At a time in the organic movement when we're seeing more and more input substitution, more and more simplification, Vermont Compost potting soils remain a stalwart reminder of what organic really means. The Fort V potting soil that Vermont Compost makes is kind of like poetry that you can use to grow the best transplants possible. The ingredient list for the compost alone, and that's 70% of the potting soil right there. I mean, this is the basis for an organic potting blend, is a study in the diversity that organic agriculture rests on, with cattle, equine, and poultry manures, hay, spoiled crops, food scraps, peat moss, and mature compost all added back in. And the potting soil itself is made up of a veritable symphony of ingredients. I don't have enough time to even go over the entire list here, but it includes granite and basalt meals, the native rocks for the Northeast that are aged in the compost to actually promote the release of nutrients before they're added back into the potting mix itself. And then they even throw in kelp for the micronutrients. And even as Carl Hammer, the founder of Vermont Compost, says, a little bit of the smell of the sea. This is a beautiful product, and it grows beautiful plants. VermontCompost.com. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is also sponsored by Audible, where you can get a free audiobook when you sign up for a 30-day trial. I'm an audio junkie from way back, and I've been downloading books from Audible for years. I think that the spoken word, whether it's a podcast or an audiobook or workshop recordings from a conference, really has an incredible power. Listening to great content is a way to really get information into your head, and I think it combines some of the best aspects of focused attention and subliminal messaging. And it's so easy now that almost everybody has an iSomething or an Android device. Audible has over 100,000 titles that you can choose from, everything from Star Wars dramatizations to the latest business books. Just go to audibletrial.com/farmer to farmer to get your free download.
Moving a farm. What was that like?
It was a huge effort. We had a moderate amount of equipment back on that rented farm. We knew that at some point we were going to leave that place for a bigger farm, so we'd been accumulating equipment that was more than we needed for 20 acres. And so when we came to this place, we had enough. We didn't have to buy much more in order to make it work. But we were incredibly lucky. The winter that we moved was unusually warm and dry, and it made life so much easier. I mean, if we had had even normal snowfall or normal cold weather, we would have had much, much more trouble. But we got the help of equipment dealers and their flatbed trucks, and they moved things here, and we moved our household, and suddenly we were on our new farm. It wasn't so sudden, but it was a real change when we were still thinking about the old farm and the new farm. And 5-6 years down the road, the new farm wasn't really the new farm anymore. It was just the farm.
Right.
And
right. Was that the same time that you stopped doing the Madison Farmers Market?
We had been at that market since 1977, and I was getting worn out on it. I always enjoyed being there, and the camaraderie was fabulous, and, getting off the farm and the socializing, I loved it. But setting up, breaking down, the intense effort, I just couldn't figure out a way to hang in the background and let other people do the work there. I was at my most intense on that Saturday morning, and I just felt like I wasn't. It was taking me longer and longer to recover. I wasn't even feeling back to normal until Tuesday after the market anymore. So once our youngest son was born in 2002, Beth said, let's start a CSA. CSA was a really going movement here in the Madison area. We had a terrific CSA coalition, a cooperative group that helped farmers get going, and that helped. We marketed together and advertised together, and we just kind of jumped into that and joined what was already happening, and dropped out of the market. In the first year, the CSA numbers almost earned back as much as we were making at market. And by the second year, we had surpassed our biggest farmers market year ever. And at this point, it's a major essential part of the farm.
And that's still a marketplace that's going strong for you guys.
Oh, the CSA. It is. Things have changed. It could be that the market it's closer to being filled up here in Madison. That's partially because we've been at it for so long. Maybe it's somewhat lost its hipness. I'm not sure of that, but there are definitely more farms. A lot of it is because there are just more farms offering more shares and more farmers who are getting really good at it. So the difference between our, more mature, experienced farm and some of the farms that were just startups, 6 or 8 years ago, is pretty small. They're doing a really excellent job, and in some ways, they may be even more focused on their CSA customers than we can be at our large size. So it's it's hanging in there. But we also sell in Milwaukee. About nearly half our CSA members are in Milwaukee or Janesville or our local farm area.
Oh, okay. So you're not just reliant on that one market in Madison.
No, not at all. No, not always, but for the past 15 years, we've been selling to Milwaukee, which is nearly 100 miles away. It's because of my ties with the Outpost Food Co-ops there. Back in 1970, I actually helped start that store. I managed it for a couple years and was really, really involved. And that's actually what kind of propelled me or pointed me into farming. But as our farm grew and we started to have enough produce in the late 90s, we started shipping into Milwaukee. We had somebody else who could take it for us at first, and then as the amount grew, we started running our own trucks, and now it's a regular part of our route. And we actually sell more than half our wholesale sales are done in the Milwaukee area.
Really?
Yeah, as well as about half our CSA members.
That's interesting because I always think of you guys as being a very Madison-oriented farm, but clearly that's been something that shifted. Is that a shift that you feel good about from a business standpoint? Is it good to have the two different markets in your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's terrific. You're dealing with really different groups of people in those two places. One huge difference with CSA is that many of our Madison CSA members receive a rebate of up to $200 a year from their HMOs, from their health insurers, as part of a wellness rebate. And none of our Milwaukee members do. It's something that's only available in the Madison area, at least right now. And if that rebate would ever disappear, and it actually is starting to fade, being not depending so much on that, not having customers who aren't used to it will help. And then the economics of the two cities are just different. We sell to those four Outpost Natural Food Co-op, which just not too long ago, I think maybe 10 years ago, had only one store in Milwaukee, now has four in Milwaukee and a couple suburbs. And, because they're spread out so widely, it just disperses our customers. I mean, it gives us access to whole different groups of customers that we just wouldn't reach if we stuck only with Madison.
When you decided to expand your retail sales with the CSA into Milwaukee, how did you go about establishing drop sites for your boxes and building that customer base from scratch in a town that isn't as CSA oriented as Madison?
Well, that's a really good question. We kind of informally duplicated the structure of that we had used in Madison, or that we had gotten involved with in Madison, of holding open house, getting some free advertising, using the good graces of nonprofit organization in Milwaukee. That was the Urban Ecology Center. It's a group that's involved with teaching kids about nature and about cycles of life, off the city streets. And they have been great. We've relied on a person or two there who was enthused about it and who was willing to do organizing among local farmers. And we just got the word out that, who's interested. There had been a couple CSA farms operating in Milwaukee. We certainly weren't the first. Pete Seeley, particularly at Springdale, had been running a CSA in Milwaukee for quite a while, and had done a lot of work, but pretty much all on his own. So that first open house, there were actually more farmers there than potential CSA members who came in the door. By the third or fourth year, the numbers were really up. It got a lot more exciting. We didn't start out, it was not a big deal at first for us. And actually, we started out using the Outpost store as a drop-off pickup site for us, and that gave us. It didn't take any extra effort. We were driving there anyway to drop off our wholesale orders, and if we only had 5 boxes, well, that's okay. It made it worth it.
Right.
So we were able to start off slowly. And the last few years, the open houses have brought in like 900 people, 1,100 people. It's really been a major event for at the Urban Ecology Center. So things have grown, and it's just due to people's interest in eating well. And the fact that farmers like us and small farmers doing these things are newsworthy. Okay? You just need some good friends in the right media. It really helps out.
And especially if you're doing it at a place where it hasn't been done before, I think there's a lot of room for building some excitement about that.
Yes, it's actually worked. I mean, Milwaukee is a much larger metropolitan area than Madison, so the potential seems phenomenal. But, of course, the Madison just has some special spark, and that's made it work.
It's that little bit of the West Coast that's in the center of Wisconsin. I think that's kind of Madison, right?
It's something like that. It's just one of those hot spots that has really worked, that allowed so many of us to make a life and a living doing this thing.
Now, when you drop off CSA shares now in Milwaukee and in Madison, are you working with the stores still to host your drop sites, or is that something you're putting that in a member's garage and walking away from it? How does that work?
Well, we're doing
on
both.
Your farm?
Actually, in Madison, we have all our drop sites are in garages. There are private houses. But in Milwaukee, we're still using the 4 Outpost natural food stores. And also we have one in a business that's for employees only there in downtown Milwaukee. And we have 3, I think 3, maybe it's just 2 actually, in garages and in members' homes. So it's a mixture. It's a mix that works out really well for us. It's really nice to have that kind of support from your partners. And I think that's something that
oftentimes we find in the natural foods co-ops that isn't necessarily existing when you start selling into some of the larger, the Rainbows and the Hy-Vees and the other grocery store chains, that they're just not, they're more focused on how to make money off of it rather than how to create a partnership in the local foods movement.
Yeah, you're definitely right there. We've been lucky to have these co-ops as partners. I mean, we're cooperative together. When it comes to setting prices, when it comes to figuring out what specials they want to run, I'm into it. They've been doing great. These foods co-ops have been essential to the whole movement here. They're really necessary, and whatever other ups and downs there may be, these stores are going to feed a lot of people. They're creative, and they're doing a great job of promoting organics and letting people know why this matters.
Well, and they don't always get so hung up on things like having to have the same brand of carrots on their shelves 12 months of the year.
Right, and they're not so hung up on looks and things being really uniform and size graded. Our quality's improved enormously, but if I look back 20 years, it's incredible the things that we used to send to stores. I think a fair amount wouldn't make it these days, but we've gotten to be a lot better farmers. I mean, everybody has.
I think the bar's a lot higher now. I've kind of wondered if I was starting farming now, how much more difficult that would be, just because of where the bar is compared to where it was. I started farming on my own in 1999, and you started that much earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, I think there's been a big shift in what customers and stores are expecting.
Yeah, that is definitely true. I'm not sure if a new farmer would find it easier or harder to meet those standards. Sometimes when you see what can be done, and you can talk as a new farmer, and you can learn at conferences and workshops and field days, and you can talk to farmers about how they get that quality, you may be able to get up to those standards fairly quickly. There's a lot more infrastructure and supports out there in terms of information and ways of getting to that information, and products and materials and inputs to the farm that were really hard to put together or just didn't exist at all 20 years ago. So I think those standards, I think it's somewhat easier for a new farmer right now to get good at it, to get a lot better at it quickly.
When you talk about those things that are available now for farmers that weren't available before, it does remind me, I think you've always been a little bit of an innovator when it comes to the equipment that you use on your farm. I mean, I remember coming to your farm in 1993, and you had a Gravely walking tractor that was kind of the equivalent of a BCS that had a wiggle hoe on the back of it. And I remember you had this crazy tractor that was kind of like a G, except that the structure went up and over the operator.
Yep.
Where the Alice Chalmers G still has that shaft down the middle. This one actually went up and over. Can you talk about, I mean, obviously at 45 acres, equipment's a big deal on your operation.
Yeah, well, equipment is a fun part of the operation, and putting things together and hunting them up wherever you can find it it's been fun. It's been enjoyable putting together a line of equipment that works and gets the job done. And older tractors, I mean, things like older small farm mauls are still fabulous for cultivating. I don't think farms should rely on a 40 or 50-year-old tractor as their main piece of equipment for any longer than they have to. But we have a mix of newer tractors and equipment. I mean, we just brought in and got a brand new rotavator yesterday delivered. Wow! And we're bringing in a carrot harvester from Europe, along with Noah Engel.
Oh, really? So are you graduating beyond the 60-year-old FMC Scott Viner harvester?
I am. We'll talk a little more about that one later.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, and that's just part of the progression from what works and what I can afford to what works better. and what I can still afford. I still have to pay attention to that. But, the numbers have changed about how much I can actually spend on something right now. We're in a position right now where, here again, I'm in my 60s. How much longer am I going to farm? I want to have equipment that is really reliable, that does a terrific job, and that does the job I expect without really needing to fool around with it. Anything I buy new right now or close to new, I will have for the rest of my farming life, for sure.
Right.
And that's a pretty good feeling. That it's like, okay, fine. This is a final decision. We don't have to keep playing with something that's old. I can pass the older equipment on to a younger farmer who for whom it might be very appropriate. We're trying to get equipment that does not have quirks, that is safe, so that employees can use it without having to fool around, that they can concentrate on doing the job rather than concentrating on keeping the equipment going. That's a really big deal once we start putting employees onto this equipment and getting them to do some of that work that I had been doing previously. It just has to be in better shape than if only I were using it. And safety is really essential, so that almost always means newer equipment is safer. And, it has the shields. It's designed with safety in mind. And often, it's not going to come apart. So, we think about that as we keep adding or replacing equipment. We're not really adding much anymore. We're just trying to take an older piece that has been, wearing down or unreliable or not quite doing the job right, and replacing it with something that'll do it better.
Yeah. Well, and that seems like an important investment in your productive capacity. Again, like you said, not having to fuss with stuff during the season.
Yes. I mean, one of our goals, the ideal, is that everything be in good enough shape by the time we hit the season, so that it doesn't break. And honestly, we have an awful lot of equipment that we don't use heavily, and we have about 8 active tractors on the farm. And there's only 2 of them that get more than about 100 hours of use a year. Well, 100 hours isn't very much for a farm tractor. Yeah. So, we just take care of them, and they tend to just keep on going.
Well, and I think that making that effort to care for the equipment and get it ready before the season starts.
Yeah.
I think that's just such a key element. Do you guys have a heated shop that you're working in over the winter?
Well, we do now. Actually, we just really fixed it up a couple years ago and put a heater in there, and it still won't stay all that warm during the coldest days. But when it's 20 out, we can work in there comfortably enough. It's not a fancy building, but we can get just about every piece of equipment in there. One piece at a time, and work it over. So we make use of our winters, and it's not something we do every day. But
how did you do it before you had a heated shop? I mean, this was something I struggled with as a beginning farmer, not having a place to pull things in and stay warm.
Well, we would get started about this time of year. Here we are, the last few days of March. It's like, it's getting warmer. It's time to work on equipment. Okay, we can start up all the tractors, get them out of the tractor shed, and start working in there. The big unheated shed. Pull them out in the sunlight and get start working on these lists we made. Because
you mentioned the list that you made.
Yes.
So as you're going through the year, finding out things that we need to fix this on the FMC root harvester.
Yeah, right, exactly. Get these. sometime during the winter, we'll try and go over each piece of equipment mentally, at least, if not physically next to it, and talk about, hey, remember this? Let's look at it and what was going on with that piece. Is there something leaking? I mean, sometimes it's pretty obvious. Get to the end of the year, look, remember the oil started coming out of here back in August, and we never got a chance to fix it. So let's fix this drip over the winter. Let's fix this power steering cylinder. There's things that are small enough that during the season you just live with them. But if you can get to them in the winter, much better. And you start the season with all those small aches and pains kind of worked out, and a new set will come along. But
yes,
but if they're that small, then you can just go through the busy times and put up with it.
I like that idea of having that time to sit down over the winter and kind of sort out all of the aches and pains from the summer and go, what do we need to fix when it's time to, when the weather's conducive to actually getting out there and fixing it.
Yes, right. Sometimes they don't take too long, but when you're busy on the day you're going to transplant is the day you want to be repairing the broken springs on the transplanter.
Right. Well, I think this is a good segue into the new thing that we're doing with the show, which is asking all of our guests kind of the same three questions at the end of the show.
Yeah.
And unlike my last episode, I actually did remember to tell the guest in advance that we were going to do this. So I've given Steve a little bit of a heads up. But I mean, are we talking about equipment? I mean, what is your favorite farm tool? What one thing do you feel like makes that really big difference in your life?
Well, you mentioned it. It is that 1954 FMC one-row root harvester. It's a carrot and beet harvester that we use also for parsnips and turnips, some winter radish, and it has been an incredibly valuable tool. And in fact, it's shaped that whole winter season for us because we can harvest tens of thousands, well over 100,000 pounds of roots, somewhere around 150,000 this past fall, and get them stored away pretty quickly and efficiently. Now, this thing is 60 years old, yet and when I bought it about 15 years ago, I paid $500 for it direct from the farmer. Prices have gone up some. That was quite a good deal then, but even then the going rate might have only been $2,000 or $3,000. But that would have still been a bargain because that machine has harvested over $1 million worth of root crops for us that we've been able to sell over the years. We use it in the summer for summer carrots and beet roots, and it's just been a fabulous tool and actually has been totally reliable, with some maintenance like you would give to an older piece of equipment, but it's never really failed on the job. So I did mention that we are replacing it, though, with a much newer, much fancier tractor-mounted European-made harvester that when it gets here soon, and when we set it up, will be the most complex piece of equipment on the farm. And we're doing that because carrots are a really important crop to us. These root crops mean a lot. And also I want the pleasure of operating a nicer piece of equipment. And I think we'll be able to harvest much more quickly and with a lot less physical effort using this new harvester. And as not only I, but my whole crew gets older, being out there in early November, racing the coming snowstorm with a 60-year-old piece of equipment isn't always as much fun as it used to be. So I'm hoping this will do a pretty good job for us.
And again, just like the FMC, it's going to pick it up, chop the tops off, drop it in a bin for you.
Yes, this will carry the bins along with it, or unload the bins at the end of the row all by itself, and the tractor operator has incredible control over this newer machine And the older machine is,
it's a tow behind unit. You've got to have somebody drive it actually on the machine, doing the steering and controlling how fast the conveyor belt's working.
Well,
right?
on the new machine, that's all done from the tractor seat.
It's all done from the tractor seat. Wow.
The folks riding are doing some sorting, and the tractor operator is guiding the machine down the row. So,
well, and I think it actually something that speaks to just the maturity not only of your farm, but of where we've gone in the local food movement now, because that's not something when you bought that Scott Viner, that FMC, that's not something that you could have supported even if you'd had the capital back then. There's no way that you would have gotten you wouldn't have had the volume of sales even potentially.
Yes,
I think on that.
Yes, you're right. I mean, any crop, of course, the whole succession of tools and critical points. We're planting. I mean, we're able to these days we have tools for making great seed beds, and we have an excellent seeder, and we still do an awful lot of hand weeding on carrots, but harvesting is one of the critical times. I mean, if we can't get the harvest done quickly and efficiently during sometimes some pretty rough weather, then all the other effort up to that point will just have been wasted. So it seems like at this point that is our bottleneck with the older harvester. As much as I have loved that machine.
I'm curious, are you going to hang on to your older harvester as a backup?
Yes, I will, certainly for a year or more as I get to learn the new one. But we've got that older harvester set up so it pulls behind the tractor in such a way that we can actually pluck out rows from the middle of the field. We don't have to work from the outside in with that harvester. So we can plant, say, a field of, 3 beds of carrots and then go a couple beds of beets. And we can go into the middle of the field if we want, say, in midsummer, and take out those beets without having to have already cleared the carrots out beforehand. And I don't think this new machine will be able to do that.
Oh, okay. Those little funny the quirks of your own farm and the way that your own operation works, I think is a really important thing to think about when you're getting new equipment.
Yeah.
When you're...
Yep. Yes, it is. I mean, we're like so many farms, I think, of our scale. In some ways, we're a pretty big farm, and that's where we could use this new harvester when we're harvesting 4 acres of carrots within a couple weeks for storage. But then in the summertime, maybe we just want to take out 2 long rows of carrots just for that week's CSA, and then leave the rest grow. We don't want to go in and take the whole field at once.
Which is really what those harvesters are designed to do. It is as a whole field harvester.
Yes.
Because I think that's the way it's anticipated that machine's going to be used.
Yeah. Yes. So to work from the outside edges of a uniform field and just work your way right to the middle.
So how about resources, Steve? When you've got a question, when you need to solve a problem, or when you're running into something new, where do you turn?
Well, I try and talk to other farmers, farmers who are operating on my scale, and that would be like Dave Perkins or Richard DeWild out here, even Josh and Noah Engel actually have been great resources. That would be number one. I mean, in a general sense, what really, really helps are conferences like the Moses Conference that's held in La Crosse each year. That's a chance to bump into people and see folks from other parts of our region that I don't get to talk to all that often, and compare and talk about things that we see and things we see coming up. I mean, that's out in the hallways, and then, the actual sessions are useful too.
It was something when I used to run the work. As you know, I used to run the workshops for that conference for years and years.
Sure.
We ran some numbers one year, and I found out that if you looked at how many people were actually in the workshops, it was typically less than half of the people that were in the conference hall at any given time.
Yeah.
I think it really speaks to the importance of those other interactions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not just about going for the sessions. It's about going for the people.
Definitely. It means a lot. The trade show at that conference and other conferences that I go to are incredibly helpful. If you're ordering seeds and you simply, phone in your order and you talk to somebody on the other end, you can get some additional information. But at a trade show where you can really talk to the seed salespeople who know the detail, they know so much more detail than you might ever imagine without really sitting down with them. The amount that they can tell you is incredible. And equipment too. I mean, last year or the 2014 Moses Conference, these folks brought the cultivators from Germany, Colt brand cultivators that were just so eye-openingly different. And it was just what I was looking for. And that's the only way to know, to see this, is to actually be there.
I'm curious, did you end up picking up a set of those? Because I certainly spent far too much time ogling those cultivators.
Yes, I did. Yes, I bought a set of these very small, fine cultivators. They called it the duos. I brought a 3-row setup that we mounted on a Farmall Super C, and they've did a very nice job on the first and second cultivations of small direct seeded crops, things like carrots or spinach or beets. They with the cutaway discs, they can work very close to the row, and when they're mounted in front of you, you've got really good control. Yeah, they have lived up to their promise.
I will find. I'll make sure we've got that resource listed in our show notes, so that folks, when they're out on their tractors, don't need to be trying to write this thing down.
Yeah.
So we'll get that get a link to that. And so, and then the last question I've got for you here is, if you could go back and tell your beginning farmer self something that your beginning farmer self obviously didn't know, what would you go back and tell him?
So I would tell him to go work on a farm, on a successful operating farm for a couple years or more, and learn by doing it. I never did that. I'm one of those farms where people come now to learn about farming before they launch into it on their own. And although there may not have been many certified organic farms around, well, there really weren't back then. We're talking about mid-'70s. I would have been further ahead. I would have had much more of a vision of where I was going if I just had worked on a diversified farm, a farm that was selling at farmers markets or had their own farm stand somewhere in Wisconsin. But I didn't, and I had to learn it all the hard way.
Now, I said one more question, and now I lied because I'm going to jump in and ask another one.
Okay.
But you mentioned successful farms. You will go and work on a successful farm. How would you identify that? Because I think that's so important. There's a lot of, and I find this especially with internships. There's a lot of farms out there that are really struggling, and you can go and work on a farm that's struggling and doesn't have the weed control, doesn't have the irrigation, doesn't have the basic functioning systems. And how do you know? How do you identify those successful operations?
Well, I guess part of it is, are they, have they been in business for a while? And are they apparently making a living at it? What's the farmstead look like? Are things in good repair? The line of equipment is, are things working? Are they selling? Do they have plenty of customers at wherever they're selling? You have to. It's hard to, without doing a little checking out, I guess. But I think that's what you would look for. There are a lot of farms that may one day be successful, but if they're in their third or fourth year, they probably are struggling. It's not that easy to really get that momentum and get going. But still, you can learn a lot by helping out a farm maybe at that stage. But you can really learn a lot more by going to a farm that's been in business for 15 or 20 years.
really kind of seeing what success looks like.
That would be, that's what I think.
Great. All right. Well, Steve, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. It's great. I'm very excited by the things you're doing too. You're really getting the word out, and anything like this that can help other people make their farms work better and be more successful. Just talking with you always gives me insight into what I'm doing here. It really helps me solidify some of my ideas and some of my vision too.
Thank you so much, Steve.
All right.
Listeners, if you don't already know, you can find links to the things we mentioned. I'm going to comb through this episode when I do my editing work, cleaning stuff up a little bit, and find all of the things that we've mentioned, because there's been quite a few resources that have come up, quite a few different pieces of equipment. We'll try to get links to all of that stuff on the farmertofarmerpodcast.com website. You can go on there and search for Pincus. That's Pincus, and that should take you right to the show notes for this episode. Steve, thank you again so much for generously sharing your time and your expertise with us today. It's been great.
Glad to do it.
I think it's just so cool that I get to talk to farmers about their farms and the perspectives they bring to their farms and to the world in general. Really, what a privilege. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. So wrapping things up here again, you can find links from the show and more at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Just search for Pincus. That's Pincus. I've even got a video of an FMC root harvester there. If you're not already listening to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the podcast app of your choice, I encourage you to subscribe to get the new episodes just as soon as they're released. And please take the time to leave a rating or review on iTunes. It really does make a difference in how many people this show reaches. You can also leave comments for us on the show notes page of each episode. I'd love to know what you think. If you like what you hear, think about signing up for my newsletter, The Flying Rutabaga, at farmertofarmerpodcast.com or purplepitchfork.com. You can follow us on Facebook at Purple Pitchfork. And one more thing, if you hung on this long, I'd really like to know what questions you, my listeners, have that my guests or I might be able to answer in the podcast. Please let me know on Facebook at Purple Pitchfork, or use the contact page on the farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Anything about farming and farm life is fair game. And if you want to be anonymous, just let me know and I won't mention your name on air. If we choose your questions to use on air, I'll even send you a Farmer to Farmer podcast mug. By the way, you can use that same contact page, or again, my Facebook page, whatever works for you, to let us know who you'd like to hear from. Are there great farmers in your neighborhood? I know a lot of great farmers, but I'm sure that I don't know all of the great farmers. Okay. All right. And with that, that's a wrap. Thank you very much. Have a great week.